This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. Over the last couple of years, a great number of people I know who share most of my politics have made radical changes in their lives by converting to Orthodox Christianity. I needed to know why. This is my interview with Buck Johnson.
I am joined from Lockhart, Texas, my favorite place in the country sometimes, by Buck Johnson. And Buck is the host of the fantastic Counterflow podcast. And we have been friends for a while now. And the thing is, you and I haven't really talked much in about a year and a half. I think I was on your show maybe once, maybe a year ago, but that's really it. And the last time we really hung out and talked was at your house, where you're sitting right now, for the RU Weekend in Texas event, which was in October of 2021. So it's about a year and a half ago.
Wow, what a crazy year and a half.
Exactly. So I have seen you during this time when we haven't really been talking, making big changes in your life. Big, huge, momentous changes, right? Affecting really all aspects of your life. And I've been watching and been very curious about what's happening. And I've also seen some of the things you're doing as part of a bigger movement that I've noticed going on sort of in our world, that our former world of like...
It's still the same circles, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I guess what you would call it, like dissident, mostly right, sometimes left-wing people, you know, libertarian with a libertarian emphasis for sure, you know, so you were part of that world, still are, and that's kind of the world I operate in. And I've seen people in this world, Buck, and I'll just cut to the chase for people who are curious about what the fuck we're talking about, move toward Orthodox Christianity. That's not just one thing that's happened with you. I think it might be the biggest thing, but it's the biggest, yeah. And it has had multiple ancillary effects, right?
That's for sure.
So yeah, I've been watching this movement from afar and been very curious about it. I've made a couple of like passive aggressive tweets about it, not at you, but just at this sort of movement in general. I'm very curious, but I'm like a little bit skeptical, of course, because it is so alien to who I've always been. I mean, as everybody knows, I started off with a very particular politics and totally changed that politics and changed much of my worldview, but this has remained constant, which is not a hostility to religion. And I've become more and more open to talking about it and curious about it. And I'm not judgmental, and I don't care at all, like, that you're doing what you're doing. My concern is what happens if this becomes a broader political movement, I guess, that actually gets some power, gains some power. And then what will all you Orthodox people do to me once that happens? That's the only concern I have. And if there's no ambition to do that, to seize any kind of serious political power and to punish me or whatever, then we're fine. But let's start with you. And I really want to just talk about you. And I think that's the way to frame this conversation. So October 2021, we're at your house. There's about 100 or so of these radical political people hanging out, mostly libertarians, some sort of dissident right wingers, some dissident left wingers hanging out, talking politics, right? Oh God, foreign policy and economics and all the things, and occasionally philosophy and all the things we're all obsessed with all the time, which I can find very, after a while, tedious and not satisfying. And I know I could feel that in you at the time we were talking about this. So at that time, Buck Johnson, you were many things, some of which you still are, but you were the host of the Counterflow podcast, which at that time was focused almost exclusively on politics, right?
Yeah.
You were a firefighter, which you have been for decades,
Still, yeah.
and still are. You were, and I think still are, a drummer, a musician,
Yeah.
and you had been in punk bands and rockabilly bands and various things in that sort of those genres. It's very important, by the way. We're going to talk about that a lot, because I know that's really important still, and with the Orthodoxy, that's interestingly still quite relevant. And you were, I would say, and I love this about you, you're a bit of a hedonist. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Not swinging from chandeliers with a bottle of champagne and doing coke off a prostitute's basket, but no, you were like, you relished.
Those things have happened.
you relished, I would say, the sensual pleasures.
Yeah.
Right. As do I. And that's one of the things I think you and I connected over. But what else were you? Let's see. You were also formerly a Southern Californian turned Texan. And you were a lifelong right winger.
For the most part. Yeah.
Right. And various stripes, various kinds, but always on the right, never on the left.
Right.
And so that's who you were as of October 2021.
And agnostic.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Okay. You were agnostic. Interesting. As was I. A year and a half ago. A year and a half ago, we were both agnostics. Okay. Now, what the fuck happened, man?
A year and a half, I guess, as we're going to call it, of some massive changes. I mean, I could start even in October. It's funny you brought up October 2021, because at that time I was, I guess, ortho curious. My friend Matt Erickson from the King Pilled show, and our mutual friend Vin Armani, who goes by Cyprian now, they had both brought that up in various episodes that I recorded with them, but it was just kind of a little nugget of it here and there. And our other mutual friend Bobby, who does my video producing, he knew that I was at least interested in figuring out what's Orthodox Christianity, because Vin is a very good talker, and he makes me think when I hear Vin talk on interviews, and Matt is the same way. And I thought, well, these guys they're inspirational to me when I hear them kind of forecast what they see coming. Vin was one of the early ones who saw what was going on with the mess in 2020 and whatnot. And he always looked at it, and he still will say this: if you looked at what happened over 2020 and et cetera, we all know what that is. I don't want to get you in trouble, but if, as a materialist, meaning you only believe in the things that you can see and touch and nothing else, then you've missed the entire point of what's going on. And that always stuck with me, like, what does that mean? And at first I thought materialist, I thought he was saying like someone who likes to buy things in the vernacular that we always would say, she's a materialist. But he meant as opposed to someone who thinks beyond just what you can see, touch, and feel. In other words, a spiritual matter. And so those things, those little seeds were planted. And then so our friend Bobby said, there's an Orthodox church. It was that weekend when you were here. He told me, he said, there's an Orthodox church in your town in Lockhart, which, if anyone's been here and anyone knows anything about Eastern Orthodoxy, it didn't seem to be the natural fit. Because this is a small Texas barbecue town, and the churches here are ubiquitous. I mean, they're per capita, it has to be, I mean, I don't know why it's called barbecue town. It should be called church town, but they're what you would think of churches in Texas. There's a few Catholic ones. There's a lot of other denominations, but mainly kind of Baptist-ish.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, he was right. And so I found it. And the funny thing is that Orthodox, it's the Russian sect of it. It's called Rokor, Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. There's a various lineages of Orthodoxy, but that's the biggest one.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a Rokor Orthodox church, and it faces an alley. So I found it and started driving by it and seeing the sign for a few weeks, like a couple times a week. And I thought, I don't want to go in there. I didn't know the traditions. I thought I look weird. I was looking much through a Western kind of, I was brought up as a Protestant. So that's so different. So I was looking at things through that lens, and I would go by there and I don't want to go in. Well, Vin had told me, read this one book by Father Seraphim Rose, who was an old Orthodox monk. And this will kind of give you some idea of what it was about. I remember getting the book and I thought, what in the world? This guy looks like an old kind of hippie, for lack of a better term, long beard and all of this. And I thought, weird. Okay. And it was so off-putting at first that I just set it aside. I was like, this is not, I don't know. He didn't look based or something like that. And so I put it away, ended up reading a few weeks later. And then in the meantime, I got a DM on Twitter from someone who had followed me and listened and still listens to my show. And he says, I heard you say that you live in Lockhart now on an episode. I'd like to invite you to my Orthodox church. It's in Lockhart. And it was one of these like Hoppian kind of guys, Hans Hermann Hoppe follow, like his name was referenced Hoppe and stuff. And I thought, what? And I said, well, I know where that church is. I've been driving by it. And so he said, yeah, come on in. And I said, well, and one of my friends, referencing Vin, because of that, I've been reading Father Seraphim Rose. And he said, oh, well, Father Seraphim is like the biggest saint. He's not technically canonized as that, but he said, Father Seraphim's the biggest saint in my life. And I've followed his journey and everything. I've read all of his books, and he's got an icon on the wall at the church. He goes, please come, you'd love it. And I was like, what a weird series of coincidences. And so that's kind of what led me to start going there. And the first time I went, because if you have politics like yours or mine, it's not always comfortable to just bring that up to normal people. Mm-hmm. I've since found out that the Orthodox, I wouldn't put them in the normie category. But at the time, I didn't know. I hadn't gone to a church in decades. Mm-hmm. And so I was kind of shy about bringing anything like that up. I met with the priest afterwards and several of the clergy guys, and they knew of the podcast and they brought it up. And my priest said that he liked it a lot, and how awful the communists were to the Orthodox Christians in Russia, and how that produced all these martyrs and saints. And I said, oh, okay, well, I feel I can relate with that. And he goes, no one hates commies more than the Orthodox Christians. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's cool. Mm-hmm. And so the bond